Excellent. Good morning and good afternoon to you, wherever you may be joining us from across Australia or overseas. Welcome to our webinar and launch of our latest report, Building an AI-Enabled Workforce, Impacts for Finance, Technology and Business Education and Training. My name is Timothy Burt, and I have the privilege of being the Director, Strategy and Planning here at the Future Skills organisation. And I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, which for me is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. The agenda for today is a busy one. We're going to have a run through of our latest report by Tom McMahon from Mandala Partners. And then we're going to follow that up with about half an hour of a panel discussion with an absolutely stellar panel. We could not have asked for a better group of panelists, and we are incredibly grateful to them for giving up their time today. Following that, we'll have about 10 minutes or so for Q&A with the panelists. So please get your thinking caps on about questions that you'd like to ask panelists or Mandala or myself about the report. So I might start by giving a bit of context and purpose background to our research report. This is the third instalment in our ongoing series of AI research. And our previous two reports have set the foundation. They've really been desktop analyses of the exposure of finance, technology and business occupations and identifying which training products are most likely to be impacted. And if you haven't had a chance to read those two reports, we'll drop the links into the chat for you to peruse at your leisure. This latest piece, well, we really wanted to build on it. We wanted to get a more detailed understanding of how AI is being adopted in finance, technology and business. What are the real world implications? What is actually happening in the workplace? And subsequently, what are the implications for skills and training? How do skills and training need to adapt? So this is part of our key efforts to identify not only the current, but also the future skill needs of the workforce and thinking about how the education and training system can help to meet those needs. So during the next 40 minutes or so, if you have any questions for the panelists or on the report, as I mentioned, please do include them in the chat, and we will have a QA at the end of our webinar facilitated by our fantastic research and insights lead, Michelle Circelli. With that, I'm delighted to introduce Tom McMahon from Mandala Partners. We have conducted this latest piece of research in collaboration with Mandala, and he's going to talk us through the latest report's findings. So with that, over to you, Tom.
Great, thanks so much, Tim. Thanks for the introduction, and really looking forward to walking everyone through the results of the latest research that we've done. Before we kick off, can I just say a huge thank you to the FSO for supporting this work as well as the previous reports that we've done. Really think it's made a valuable contribution to the story around how AI is being adopted and the important role that the vet sector and other parts of the training system in Australia can undertake to help prepare the workforce of today and the future for this important new technology. If we can jump through the next slide, please. The work that I'm going to show you, as Tim mentioned, builds on previous work that the FSO and Mandala have researched together, which looked at how occupations are exposed to AI and how changes around AI can be prioritized based on that exposure level. So the work that I'm going to be presenting today looks at real world adoption. We surveyed hundreds of Australian businesses and conducted comprehensive stakeholder interviews with C-suite level executives in major Australian companies to understand how AI is being adopted in those businesses to bring these insights to you today. If we can go to the next slide, please. Today, I'm going to cover three key topics. So firstly, what is the context under which we're undertaking this work? What is the economic imperative that will drive AI adoption in Australia, and why does it matter? Secondly, what are the challenges that businesses and workers are facing in terms of using this exciting new technology to perform their work better so that they can be more productive and efficient? And ultimately to free up time to do other activities and the work tasks that they really enjoy. Thirdly, what is the role of the training system, and in particular VET, in offering training to help workers get up the skill curve so that they can adopt generative AI in the workplace? If we can go to the next slide, please. Yep, one more. So today, for those who don't follow these things so closely, is the day of the federal budget. It's most likely going to precede an election that will probably be called on the weekend. And one key economic challenge that both sides of politics are focused on closely is the productivity challenge that Australia faces. So productivity growth in Australia has fallen by about a third over the last decade, and labour productivity is now growing at around 1.2%. That means each year, with the same amount of workers, we're doing about 1.2% more economic output when compared to 1.75% in the period from 2004 to 2007. Why does this matter? Well, productivity growth is the fundamental driver of living standards. So without productivity growth, we can't get higher wages and higher living standards. And this has been called out by both sides of politics. We see here we've got a quote from the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers: "There is no more important structural problem in our economy than productivity." And Angus Taylor, the Shadow Treasurer, saying that the biggest bang for your buck is going to be labour productivity in terms of improving economic outcomes because it's gone backwards so much in the last 2 years. And what's the connection between AI and productivity? Well, the link here is around the important role that new technology plays in advancing productivity. New technology is a fundamental driver of productivity growth. And so adopting AI will be critical to growing our productivity, which will drive living standards going forward. If we can go to the next slide, please. So previous research by the Tech Council of Australia found that generative AI could deliver up to $115 billion in economic value to Australia under its fast-paced adoption scenario. But you can see that slower adoption rates will lead to significantly less economic upside for the country. So a medium-paced adoption would only deliver 75 billion and slow-paced adoption around 45 billion. So clearly there is a huge dividend to Australia in terms of adopting generative AI more quickly, which can help with that productivity challenge that I just alluded to, and therefore, improve the productivity and prosperity of Australia. But how is that adoption going? That was the fundamental question that motivated this research work that we've undertaken with the FSO. So if we can go to the next slide. The story I'm going to tell here is the results, the key findings of our research, which show that despite the really significant productivity upside for Australia, around a third of workers in the FTB subsectors do not use AI at work. And the key barriers that they've called out to adoption of generative AI at work and AI tools more broadly is the lack of trust and training. So if we can go to the next slide, please. At a top level, one key question that we were interested in is asking people, do you use AI at work? And what our research found was that around 2/3 of Australians that we surveyed are using AI tools at work, with the split being around 60-40 in favour of official use of AI, but clearly many Australians are also using AI tools unofficially, be that through their work-provided computers or even on their phones as well. But really concerningly, around 36% of individuals do not use AI at work at all. So if we think about the potential productivity upside for Australia, if around a third of workers in the finance, tech and business sectors are not using AI tools, then that will significantly limit our ability to get that economic upside. If we can go to the next slide, please. So linking back to the previous work that we've undertaken for FSO, where we looked at theoretical exposure of occupations to AI, what we wanted to do was compare how does the survey research compare with those findings in terms of showing what percentage of people are actually using AI at work. And what we can see here is an interesting paradox, which is that while finance occupations are the most exposed to AI, actual adoption of AI tools is highest in the technology sector. When we undertook stakeholder consultations, we found that this was driven fundamentally by the fact that many workers in those tech businesses are early adopters and are passionate about technology. So when a new tool like generative AI comes out, workers in that sector are much more likely to adopt it, even though many occupations in that area have a lower exposure. We heard things like, if we were to take away Microsoft Copilot, there would be a riot among software developers at a major Australian software company. So clearly, these tools are being adopted really quickly in the tech space, but are being adopted more broadly as well. And so it just shows that, it's one thing to analyze at a theoretical level how this is going to play out, but fundamentally tech adoption is done by people. And one key driver of that adoption is just people's taste and interest in using technology. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Overwhelmingly, the task that people use AI tools most for is written communication. So we saw that in a free text question where we asked people to talk about the AI tools that they were using, that written communication, broadly speaking, was the number one thing that people are using AI tools for, with around 47% of respondents selecting written communication. And I think this probably plays out with many people on the call's experience. Certainly, it resonates with my experience using AI tools, whether that be to, generate reports or to refine emails or written copy, developing marketing materials. All of these are really common tasks that these tools are used for. Then, of course, there's a long tail of other tasks that people use, specialized applications, data analysis, research assistance, and even in some cases, customer service. Though what I would say based on our engagements with senior technology leaders is that people are experimenting at this stage rather than going all in on using AI tools for customer-facing tasks. If we can go to the next slide, please. In terms of how people see AI helping them at work, the number one reason that people selected, with around 75% of respondents choosing this question, was that it increases their efficiency and improves the quality of their work. So thinking back to the start of this presentation when I spoke about the productivity challenge that Australia faces, this clearly shows that there is a huge potential productivity upside for Australians, with 3/4 of people who are using AI tools at work selecting increased efficiency and improved quality of work as the number one reasons that they use those tools. It also shows the way that AI is going to fundamentally augment many tasks rather than replace them, with automation being only the third of the options selected. If we can go to the next slide, please. When we wanted to ask respondents what the barriers were to them using AI at work, the two top reasons were that people cannot trust the quality and confidentiality of AI, and that they lack skills and training to use it confidently. This came throughout all of our stakeholder consultations, where people spoke about, experimenting with the technology, understanding its limits, but also the role that skills and training plays, both in confidently using these tools, but also in building trust in how to use them well. What are the circumstances when AI tools are appropriate? What are the circumstances when they're not appropriate? And therefore, how can we use these tools confidently? And I think that, really calls forward a really significant implication for the FSO, but for the training system in Australia more broadly, which is that if we're going to succeed in adopting these tools, it's going to be by improving people's trust and understanding of the technology through the use of skills and training. And that can be a massive unlocker in terms of enabling Australians to access that economic opportunity. If we can go to the next slide, please. We also wanted to get a sense of how AI adoption is differing for different demographic groups. And one thing that we haven't presented here, but that came through in our research, was that we do not see a gender gap in the adoption of AI in Australia, which runs counter to some of the literature results that showed men being more likely to use AI. But what we do see is that there is a difference by age, by location, and also by income level. So younger people are much more likely to adopt AI tools. People in metropolitan areas are much more likely to adopt AI tools, and people on higher incomes are much more likely to adopt AI tools. And the reason that this is so important is that if we want to make sure that that AI does not increase the digital divide but reduces it, we need to make sure that these gaps by different demographics are closed. And a key lever to closing these gaps will be the use of education to build people's trust. If we can go to the next slide, please. So finally, I want to touch on what the implications are for the training system in terms of growing the adoption of generative AI in Australia before we get to the panel discussion. If you can go to the next slide, please. Overwhelmingly, workers are interested in receiving more AI training, with 86% of workers expressing interest. There's not many questions in Australia where you can get 86% of respondents to agree to something. And so the fact that 86% of people would be interested in receiving more AI training really shows the potential here to grow people's understanding. And I think the fact that we've got, some 360 people on the webinar today is also an indication of that thirst for knowledge and understanding that exists in the community, and the important role that the training system can play in terms of fulfilling that desire. If we can go to the next slide, please. What we developed in the report, which you can review in more detail, is an action plan for rolling out AI-related training products. We think in the short term, there's a key role that the vet sector can play in terms of delivering non-accredited, broad-based and transferable generative AI skilling courses. So this is around how do we understand AI? How do we use it at work? What are the pitfalls to using it? And how can we integrate it in our work? People really said that they wanted short courses that were immediately relevant to their work. In the medium term, we think that developing a broader suite of accredited courses and monitoring generative AI adoption trends in the FTB sectors to consider how more specific use cases can be catered for. And then finally, in the long term, as those use cases become more clear, expanding coverage of transferable, broad-based generative AI training courses into those more sector-specific use cases would be really important. If we can go to the next slide, please. Organizations are going to need to think about their AI maturity and how they're adopting AI and where they are on this spectrum of AI maturity. And so what we've outlined in the report is that maturity scale and how businesses can think about increasing their AI maturity so that they can take advantage of these tools. And you can review that in more detail in the report. And then the next slide, please. And I think the final slide. Just to give you a taste of the other findings that we had around stakeholder consultation before I throw back to Tim, we saw a number of key themes come through in the consultations that we undertook with businesses and with unions in terms of adopting generative AI. And the key themes there were about developing a strategy and having that led by senior leadership within organizations, thinking about areas that pilot tests can be conducted where results can be monitored. Importantly, there's a real important role that came through around transparency on how AI tools are used and how workers can be involved in collaborating in developing these tools and thinking about how they're rolling out. And if we think about trust as a key barrier, one great way to build trust with workforce is through that transparency and collaboration. And then finally, it's really important to measure the impact so that you can understand the value for your organizations and then grow the education and understanding through the use of things like AI champions and targeted training courses. So I hope that gives you a whirlwind tour of the report. I encourage you to grab a copy of it and go through it, and be happy to take any questions later today or also offline. If you have any questions, you can reach out via LinkedIn or through the Mandala website as well. Thanks very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. Great summary. Lots to unpack there. I saw a couple of questions in the chat about the types of AI tools that are being referenced, and all of that level of detail is in the full report. So without further ado, we will move on to the panel discussion. And as I said, it is an absolute stellar panel. And I'll just give a quick introduction for each of our panelists, starting with Ray Fleming, who is the Chief AI Officer at InnovateGPT. Ray has decades of experience in education technology, including leadership roles at Microsoft and Google, and also hosts the AI in Education podcast. Next, we have Sarah Carney, who is the National Chief Technology Officer for Australia and New Zealand at Microsoft, who has had an amazing career spanning 3 continents, multiple industries, with a focus on driving business strategy and digital transformation. We also have Luke Achterstraat, the CEO of the Council of Small Business Organisations Australia, or COSBOA. And Luke has extensive experience in government policy and advocacy, and is now responsible for leading efforts to support and champion small businesses across Australia. And finally, we also have Nicole McPherson, Assistant Secretary at the Finance Sector Union of Australia, who is representing and advocating for workers in the finance sector, addressing key industry challenges to protect employees' rights right across the country. So Ray, I'm going to start by kicking off with you. As you've just heard, significant impact on productivity and a massive opportunity there, but the research has found sort of quite slow adoption rates, with 1/3 of workers not using AI in any form. In your view, is that what you're hearing? Does that resonate with you? How fast do you think AI is really changing the way we work here in Australia?
Yeah, I think it's pretty exciting that 2/3 are using it rather than 1/3 are not using it. Considering the fact that this technology has been here for what, 2 years and 5 months, in the sense of generative AI. So that's actually pretty rapid adoption compared to other technologies. But I guess what we're seeing is there's organizational versus individual use, and that comes out really strongly in the report. The way I feel about it is I break it down into 3 levels. I think about personal productivity. I then think about process productivity. And lastly, I think about paradigm productivity, which is a totally new model for doing things. So let's just break those down. Personal productivity is, I think, what we see in the report. Individuals that are using generative AI in order to help them write, help them achieve business processes. And it's something they're doing individually. Often they're not telling anybody else about it. They're certainly, in many cases, not telling their boss about it. And I don't think I would either, because if I found a way to save myself an hour a day, the last person I'm going to tell is my line manager. But that leads to a challenge for us, which is that we're not really, as organizations, seeing the benefit flow through in productivity terms, because we're not capturing that benefit at the organizational level. We're capturing at an individual level. And there's lots of different numbers floating around I see in case studies all of the time, between saving 30 minutes a week pays for itself to 9 hours for a professional a week saving time. So its adoption is fast. Users are finding uses for it really fast. It's a bit invisible, and there's maybe a call to community or collegiality. Have people in your organization confident to tell other people how they're using it, because that leads to discovering other use cases. Now, that's the personal productivity level. The process productivity level is where you look at something you're doing as an organization and you say, we could do that better. AI could help us do that process better. And there's a lot of work going on within organizations about, okay, the employees are using it to write, to be creative, to do chat stuff. Let's give them the internal resources to do that. So worked on a project around a policy bot, which was employees being able to ask an internal bot policy questions. Turned out it couldn't answer any of the questions that the employees had, because the policies didn't answer the questions that the employees had, which then led to a reflective thing about, well, are we genuinely trying to make our organization more efficient? So a lot of those decisions about changing processes and using AI to help processes, they've got a clear ROI that means you spend X and you get this much benefit. Now, the third level, the paradigm productivity level, that is about creating a new model for doing things. If you think about the pre-AI examples of that, it's Uber versus the taxi industry. The taxi industry was saying, how do we make a small step forward? And Uber said, the customer wants to get from A to B. How do we make that process easy? It's Blockbuster trying to find a way to post more DVDs or host more DVDs in store, whereas Netflix said, somebody's sitting at home and they want to watch a movie. How do we solve that problem? If I'm really, really honest, I think we have a challenge in Australia about risk aversion within the culture of running organizations. And so we're not really thinking about that. The challenge from that kind of model is it tends to come from challenges outside of industry sectors rather than inside them. Uber didn't come from the taxi industry. Netflix was in the industry, but it took some out of the box thinking. In terms of the skills, what are we going to see? I think some skills are going to become way more critical, because using generative AI in a business or as an individual is a combination of IQ and EQ. It's not just about being the smartest person in the room. It's also about being the most empathetic, to think through things from the other perspective. And essentially the skills we need to get an AI working for us, whether it's ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini, is, can I talk to it like I'm talking to a human and manipulate it to give me the best results? And so critical thinking, IQ and EQ, experimentation, all those become the really important skills for workers going forward, as well as the specialist skills they need to apply in their role. So work's going to get more brain intensive as we offload stuff to AI, and suddenly we're removing some of the drudge work that allows us to maybe have a mental break between tasks. And that's called out in the report, but it's going to be important to just keep reskilling to keep up.
Excellent. Thank you, Ray. I love that way of sort of thinking about the three models of change that AI is affecting. And as we've just heard, what we're seeing is mainly that sort of personal productivity gains is where we're seeing most adoption. So with that, Sarah, next question for you is, what's your view? What are the emerging trends in AI that businesses need to be aware of? And how do you think they can prepare for these changes?
I think Ray said it all, so you don't need to ask me that question. No, it's always lovely when you have other people who come from different areas thinking the same way. And so, the big trends we see are exactly what Ray talked to. It's this focus on how do you improve employee experiences through the use of AI? How do you engage and deliver a different experience for your customers? Like, we all want to service our customers or stakeholders in new and different ways. So how do they do that through the use of AI? How do we optimize operations, which is what Ray was talking to? And I love your paradigm framing for it, Ray. We talk about it, bending the curve on innovation. And actually, I think it's really interesting because that's the one that challenges people. But I've seen companies doing this really beautifully, where they look at what they already have and think about how they could do it differently. And my favorite example is actually a New Zealand company. I'm sure someone in Australia will come up with one I can talk about. Oh, actually, I lie. I've got a good one for Australia. Pet Barn. Pet Barn have done this really nicely. They've got pet AI. And this is exactly what they were thinking about. They're like, how do we help all these pet lovers, like myself, my dog's sitting on the floor behind me somewhere. How do we help all these pet lovers connect themselves with veterinary advice and information, as well as the supplies they may need for their pets through the use of AI? And so it's a really beautiful application that they've curated, bringing safely together that insight on veterinary science, and maybe I need advice on what kind of tablets my dog might need, but also the ability to then purchase that content. And so they've taken something they already did and thought about, how do we do that differently, connect with new audiences in different ways? How do we think about the ecosystem we exist within, and how do we bring those pieces together? But I think the one that's really interesting that Ray started touching on is this opportunity to actually reinvent work. And I think what I see a lot of organizations doing at the moment is they're doing the same things they've always done, just adding AI to it. So they're doing the same things, but faster. And actually the value in this moment is, how do we actually do different things? How do we rethink the way we actually work? How do we actually come at it completely differently and not just do the same things faster with the use of AI? And so I think that's a really interesting trend we see emerging. But there are, I call them the shifting sands that sit behind the scenes of all of this. And Ray alluded to it, and actually Tom talked to some of them as well. And that first one that Ray was talking about is what I term it cognitive dissonance, which is this deep desire to use the technology, but this fear that if I'm really, really good at it, I might lose my job. And so you see those two pieces battling out. And that's what Ray was saying is, you don't realize the value because you've got this battle going on, which is why on Tom's stats, you saw that large chunk of people who are using shadow IT. I've never seen as much shadow IT as I have in the last couple of years, because people are bringing their own AI to work. And so as leaders in organizations, as you start to deploy this, you have to think about how do you overcome that cognitive dissonance? How do you give people comfort and understanding? And so that clarity of message, clarity of strategy, and we call it leader-led transformation. So someone standing out the front saying, this is our expectation. This is what we want you to do with the technology. And this is what we expect you to do with any time that is created for you out of the use of the technology. So people have that psychological safety and that comfort in the moment that this is why they're doing it. It's not that I'm going to lose my job, but there is an opportunity to learn, grow, and do different things. The second challenge I term comfort inertia. It's that classic thing. Oh, I tried it, I didn't like it, I'm going to go back to the old way of doing it. And so how do you overcome that comfort inertia? And AI, and generative AI particularly, really suffers from this. It's a bit like having an intern. And if the intern walked into your office and produced something that you didn't like, you're not going to go, sorry, I'm never using you again. You'd coach them. And that's the same muscle we now need to build for the use of generative AI. You have to coach it to get it to the thing that you want, collaborate with it. And those are skills that we often don't have. And so in this conversation about skilling, I think the thing we often miss is the fact that we need continuous, always on skilling and education. You're building a new muscle that people don't have. And if you train them once, you don't go to the gym once, lift weights and go, yes, I've got muscles. You go week after week after week. And so any training, skilling, or educational programs need that longevity or multiple touch points or multiple opportunities to build and grow this muscle that we now need if you want to see that scaled adoption.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. That's really fascinating insights. My key takeaways there is this kind of this tension and fear of the unknown, if you will, and the need for leaders to think about how to overcome that through clarity of messaging, clarity of strategy, and helping sort of state the expectations around transformation. I think that's excellent sort of key takeaways there. Luke, I will move on to you. In the report, it wasn't presented this morning, but it is in there. We did find a sizable difference in adoption rates between small and large businesses. So around about 58% of small businesses have adopted AI in some form, whereas compared to 72% of large businesses. What sort of practical steps do you think small businesses can take to adopt and integrate AI really sort of safely and effectively? And it's probably part of that leader-led transformation that Sarah talked about.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And talk about hard acts to follow with Ray and Sarah's great insights. Look, I think the answer is this. I think small businesses are time poor. They juggle multiple hats. They wear multiple hats at any given time. And the current operating environment for small business is arguably the toughest in living memory. So rising energy, rent, insurance costs means that at the moment for a lot of our people, their number one priority is keep the lights on. We're very much in a survive rather than seek to thrive environment. So with respect to the commentary about the budget we heard earlier today, certainly a huge opportunity to see what the government says about AI, but certainly what we might see in the budget with respect to productivity, because really that productivity growth is what we need to see to get small businesses firing again. Now, that differential between small businesses using AI compared to, say, larger enterprise, I think another point to make here, Tim, is it's a little bit of a risk-reward ratio. So for a lot of small businesses, let's remind ourselves here, they're not part of a multinational enterprise with an IT department. They don't have a CISO. They are their CISO, their Chief Information Security Officer. So there is a different risk to reward ratio that exists. So the first step we see how we can help a lot of small businesses is to actually build their general cyber resilience. And what I mean by that is a degree of training around cyber awareness, cyber resilience, cyber hygiene, if you like. A blatant plug for a program we have through COSBOA, which is Cyber Wardens. Cyber Wardens is a tailored 45-minute online course for a time-poor small business owner to get their head around not 50, not 60, but what are 5 or 6 things I can do in my small business to protect myself against the risk of a cyber attack. So, password management, device management, multi-factor authentication, all these other very, very long words and technical terms that we can try to break down into layman's terms and try to actually give small businesses that cyber shield, if you like. And small businesses are at the centre of Australia's national cyber strategy. Now, why is that important? It's important because as well as defending against a cyber attack, which can make a small business insolvent, it's also a bit of a gateway into building that familiarity, building that confidence and that competence. We often talk a lot about, at COSBOA about how do you build confidence and competence in small businesses, and you can't really be competent in AI until you have that confidence in it as well. And I think that very much came through in the research with the 33% of people sort of holding a degree of, I don't want to say suspicion, but perhaps a degree of the fear of the unknown, or perhaps it is that comfort inertia that Sarah talked about. What a great term. I think we've all experienced comfort inertia. So that's where we start. How do we reduce that risk? How do we build that confidence? And as such, build that adoption? Now, what are the implications of that? The more that we're seeing small businesses engage with AI, we're seeing it used in a range of tangible ways. Obviously, written communications, things like automated messages to customers, marketing, really trying to save a lot of time of that sort of labor-intensive functions that a lot of small businesses need to undertake. Things like stock management and inventory management, a lot of that data analysis that can be done through AI to really give small businesses a better understanding of what stock do they need and where and when. We represent 2.5 million odd small businesses. Take, for example, the butchers. You're seeing a lot of independent, smaller butchers actually engaging with AI and engaging in the digital world to better connect with their customers and to better understand what are the changing nature of consumption. There was a time where that a family would do a big weekly shop at a butcher, and that would set them up for the week. But you're now seeing, busy young professionals who are a little bit more time poor, maybe coming in once or twice a week just to buy a meal for one. They might come in and just ask for 2 sausages and a couple of other things. So their way of consuming is now different to how it was. AI can really help a lot of small businesses understand that. I do want to shout out the Institute of Certified Bookkeepers, because I've seen Amanda Linton in the chat making some excellent points. In particular, AI is only as good as its last conversation, or AI is only as good as what you put into it. And just to acknowledge the work of our bookkeeping industry, who really are that sort of shoulder a lot of small businesses lean on during hard times. But the way in which the bookkeepers have utilized AI to make their processes more efficient, right? So actually to spend less time on potentially time-consuming spreadsheets and allowing bookkeepers to actually spend more time doing what's important, which is giving advice, helping their businesses comply, and actually providing that value add. So far from AI being a sort of a job killer in a lot of these industries, it's actually a job creator and a job enhancer that allows that human capital to really free itself up and focus on what it needs to do. Just leave you with one last example, Tim, because you've talked about, well, what's the way forward with education and training? Well, it's this. It's collaboration, it's communication, and it's looking to partner between different organizations. So happy to mention that we are in conversations with Microsoft, with other technology companies about how can we look at doing some, be they workshops or other pieces of work to really get that cross-pollination, create those sort of safe spaces for small businesses where they can experiment, they can learn in a non-judgmental space and with the right parameters and with the right guardrails around it. I'll just leave you with a anecdote I heard recently. Was actually a research phenomenon in the 1970s and 80s. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of the solo paradox, or it's also known as the computer productivity paradox of the 1970s and 80s. This was effectively where computers were invented, and a lot of big corporates said, oh, that's the shiny new gadget, I'm going to get one for my workplace. And they're literally wheeling in these massive computers the size of half a truck, in their office. And shock horror, productivity didn't increase. Productivity actually stalled in a lot of those enterprises, and it's been well documented by Robert Solow, this economist. And what he found was it was the mistreatment of information, it was the mistreatment of data, it was the lack of skills and training. And to be fair, because computers were literally so novel at the time. And there was about a 10, 15-year lag until you started seeing the 1990s, particularly in retail and other industries, that productivity dividend coming through, the rise of the humble computer, which we now carry around in our back pocket. So I just leave that example with you to say this is nothing new. This phenomenon of a new technology, how do we embrace it? How do we manage it? And how do we build capability around it? There's longitudinal data here. We've seen how this can play out. So we know what needs to be done. It's that resilience building, that training. And that's what COSBOA is up for. And that's why we enjoy working with the Future Skills organisation. So I might park it there, Tim, but just to leave that door open to anyone on the call to look at cyberwardens.com.au, but also to engage with COSBOA on AI adoption for small businesses in Australia. So thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you, Luke, for that, providing the unique insights about the challenges facing small businesses in Australia. And that lag that you talk about is something we are focusing our efforts on avoiding for the uptake and adoption of AI. The other key thing I took away from that was learning in a non-judgmental space. That's something that has been raised with us frequently at all levels within organisations, small and large. So we need to sort of turn our minds to thinking about how we attend to that. So thanks so much, Luke. Nicole, after listening to this conversation, what do you think what's the impact on the worker that you're seeing? You've heard about the lack of trust impacting adoption. What can industry do to address that? And how does the education training sector work with industry to address that lack of trust? Do we have Nicole?
Okay, hopefully my tech is working.
Excellent. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the excellent question. Now, what we know for sure is that the only way for workers to be brought into the conversations around AI and to actually start using the technologies is for them to start being included in the conversation early. By the time the tools are actually being adopted in workplaces, it's far too late for workers to be able to feel engaged in the process and actually be able to have a meaningful contribution to how these technologies are going to be rolled out. Now, at the risk of having dueling surveys, I would like to share a couple of insights that we gained from a survey that we did of over 2,200 finance workers across Australia recently. Broadly, from the results of this survey, our members said that they wanted three main things. They wanted proper regulation, they wanted consultation and transparency, and they really needed education and training. Now, when it comes to proper regulation, one of the big concerns of our members is that a lot of these technologies are being rolled out in a way that they don't feel comfortable contains enough regulation and that there are enough guardrails around how these technologies can be used. When it comes to consultation and transparency, this really goes to the fact that a lot of these pieces of technology are coming into workplaces as basically a fait accompli, where people aren't being involved early at the idea stage to have a conversation about what do you actually need in your workplace? What would actually make your working life better and easier? Instead, tools are coming online without a conversation about what people actually need and whether they have the skills and the experience to be able to really take maximum advantage of those tools. When it comes to training and education, people really told us that they just didn't have the experience, they didn't have the familiarity with the tools, and they didn't have the hard training, the hard education opportunities to be able to skill them up into how to use these tools in the most effective ways, even though they really wanted to. And on that question of training specifically, 60% of workers in our sector said that they've had no training or development on these new tools. 40% though said that they did want training on AI, and that was something that was really important for them to be able to engage properly in the rollout of these technologies. And when we asked them what kind of training they wanted, it was kind of split. People, and you can kind of tell that this relates to people's level of familiarity with the technologies, but people broadly said that they were either looking for general training about what kind of changes they might see in their workplaces and how they might engage. But for people who were a little bit more comfortable with the technologies, who were a little bit more sophisticated when it comes to these tools, they were saying that they really needed application-specific training so that they could maximize their use of these tools in their roles. Now, 65% of respondents said that they were really optimistic about the potential of AI, specifically to free them up from the more boring and mundane aspects of their job. And when it comes to finance workers, what we've found broadly is that they are really excited about the possibilities of new technology. They are no longer the workforce that, is picketing ATMs and saying that we don't want those new technologies coming online. People in the finance sector generally are really excited about the possibilities of these new technologies. But at the moment, there is a really substantial information gap. There's also a fairly significant trust gap that we were able to identify. That while people were excited about the possibilities of these new technologies, there was a pretty significant level of concern about employers' ability to implement these technologies ethically. Now, overlaid with all of this is the obvious concern about job security. 61% of our members said that they were really concerned about job security. And as Sarah said earlier, that does have the impact of making people less likely to engage in these technologies, because the concern is that the more that they engage with them, the more likely it is to cost them their job. So allaying people's concerns about the future of their role and the security of their role is going to be incredibly important in making sure that people are actually being able to engage fully with these new technologies. One of the other really important points that our members are talking to us about is when it comes to these technologies, we know that there are going to be really significant productivity gains. It's really important to us that those productivity gains are shared between employers, employees, and our community, and they don't just go to continuing to increase the profits of employers. Because the problem with that, one of the many problems with that, of course, is that it means that workers are going to be in a situation where they are adopting these new technologies, they are not seeing any of the benefits specifically, and that it's potentially going to cost them their jobs. Now, what's the answer to all of this for finance workers? We need to proactively bring finance workers into the conversation about these technologies early. It's really important that employers share with employees their roadmap for these technologies, and that employees are brought into that process early so that they can start to do the training and development that they need to be able to be equipped for the jobs of the future. We know that a lot of the existing industrial instruments that we have, the industrial mechanisms that we have, things like consultation, for any of the nerds in the audience, those things don't really work with new technologies because they happen far too late in the process. They're triggered really late in the piece. What we really need is that this conversation starts earlier, so at the ideas stage, so that workers are brought into the conversation, they're empowered to contribute to what the technology rollout looks like, and they're given a genuine, period of time and also opportunity to do the training and development that they need to really be part of the future of AI in the finance sector.
Excellent. Thank you, Nicole. That's a fantastic summary of a great report. And we've put the link to the FSU report in the chat. And my sort of key takeaways, other than involving workers in the conversation early, is the sense of optimism about the adoption of AI and the excitement, but just this gap in trust and understanding, which very much mirrors what we've been hearing. So thank you so much to the panelists. And with that, I will hand over to our fantastic research and insights lead, Michelle Circelli, who will facilitate the audience Q&A, picking up the questions in the chat. Over to you, Michelle.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, it's been a fabulous session so far. So thanks to the panelists, and a really interesting side conversation happening here in the chat. So I wanted to pick up on a point, Nicole, that you were talking about in terms of the education training. And, clearly your members were saying they want more training. And we found in our work, 86% of our survey participants were saying that, they really want more AI training. But with that fast pace of change, and Sarah, you were, talking about it, how quickly it's moving. We've had comments in the chat about, well, how do we keep up? We need that continuous learning. So I'm going to put to you, Luke and Sarah, if you answer this. In terms of education training, do you think micro-credentials or short courses, are they the best way to go to deliver our AI-related training that's needed in the workplace? Or do we need a deeper curriculum? Or is there room, like, do we have both? So Sarah, I might ask you to respond first, and then we'll, Luke, if you can respond after that.
I want both. I was going to say what Luke said, but I want both. I think the challenge is that we need very current skills and learning pathways, and micro-credentials are a great way of doing that because they can be developed very quickly, deployed quickly, and kept up to date. But there is this fundamental skill set we need, and so there's a place for these deeper learning pathways as well. So I feel like both things can be true, but I also think this is an opportunity to explore new and different ways of finding how do you deliver that education, both in the workplace and from training establishments. Like there's a real opportunity because it's such an unusual technology moment we find ourselves in. And so challenging ourselves to step into that and try new things, I think, will be important.
Yeah, I think I would agree with Sarah. I think there's definitely a role for both. I think probably micro-credentials are really good to maybe tap into some of that low-hanging fruit. I think the agility of micro-credentials is really profound here too. I mean, I mentioned our Cyber Wardens program, which a lot of our industry associations are actually incorporating to their own CPD, continuous professional development program. So actually having, you know, a cyber accreditation, or perhaps it's an AI accreditation in their toolkit is actually not just encouraged, but eventually might be mandatory. You know, if you're going to operate as a mortgage broker, you're going to be a member of the Mortgage Brokers Association. The majority of them are self-employed, they're small businesses. They're dealing with sensitive information with loan applications. They need to be very accredited and capable across cyber. And equally, how do we then maybe build into that an AI credential as well? So I think that agility, we've seen how that model can work quite well, and how there can be possibly little bits of tailoring made to different sub-industries, you know, noting, you know, the finance sector might differ from, you know, the building sector in terms of what some of those requirements look like. But I think Sarah's almost also hitting on a threshold question here, which is what is the role of AI in our education system overall? And I think it was really fascinating to see, for those who observed, the way the universities have really pivoted from being sort of very anti-AI and we're going to police it and we're going to, you know, look over it with a fine tooth and comb and make sure our students aren't using it, to almost the other end of the spectrum and saying, well, actually, we've got no hope in hell of doing that. So let's just kind of let it be free reign. I mean, I'm simplifying a bit here, but let's just unleash this thing and actually try to work with students on how can they best make the most of those technologies. So there's been this paradigm and ideological shift in our university sector about AI. And these are the sorts of the big conversations that really need probably dedicated forum to have. So long way of saying, bring on the micro-credentials, and there'll be a whole other philosophical conversation that is arguably just getting started.
It's true. And I was just in a webinar at the end of last week put on by the Australian Technology Network. And in fact, the new Adelaide University that's coming into play very soon, so the combination of UniSA and University of Adelaide, will have as a core subject AI. So in every discipline, it's been brought in. But Nicole, so with the training, how do we... There was a lot of commentary in the chat there about, you know, the role of leaders, and Sarah spoke to this as well. But so sort of almost like a top-down approach. How do we really try to bring in and develop that bottom-up? So bring in the worker. So what can businesses or employers do to truly connect and ask their employers what tools, what do they do? What do they want to use the tools for? How will it better their job?
Well, of course, the first thing I would say is engage with the relevant trade union. We think that that's always a really important point as the voice of workers in any workplace. I think that one of the most important things is to be very transparent about how the technology is going to be used over time. This is one of the biggest gaps that we're seeing at the moment, that workers don't know what the intention is with the use of these technologies, and then that's causing that level of fear. But what we have found at certain employers where they have been very transparent about how they're intending to use the technologies over time, that's given workers a way to engage in the conversation when their job isn't on the line. What we found is that when the conversation is around, your role, Michelle, I'm awfully sorry, is affected by AI, it really changes the psychology and how you're engaging in that conversation versus saying, hey, we've looked at these tools that might help you with your role. Can we start having a conversation about that? Workers come to that conversation in a vastly different mindset, and we've found that that mindset is much more amenable to being able to have good outcomes. So we think it's having those conversations early when there isn't a job on the line. And I think it's also part of workplace democracy. It's making sure that everybody in a workplace has a voice and that we aren't viewing it as top down or bottom up. It's that everybody in the workplace has an important thing to say and has a genuine contribution to make. So I guess it shouldn't be a situation where a leader is having to kind of stoop to speaking to the lower graded people. It's an acknowledgement that those lower graded people have genuine expertise and a contribution to make in how these tools might be used and what the value of them is.
Thanks for that, Nicole. And it actually points to, Ray, you had a point earlier about Gen AI as a combination of IQ and EQ for use, but also clearly really important to lead with AIs. You've got to have the IQ and the EQ. I don't know if you can answer this question, Ray, really quickly. We've got a question from the audience. What does it actually mean to be trained in AI? What are the skills?
I really don't think we know, because nobody knows what the AI technology that's going to be released tomorrow is going to be able to do. So I think it's part of it is a neuroplasticity, that you're kind of going with the ideas and you're able to adjust. Let's go back to the intern analogy that Sarah used, which I love, and I use that all the time, because you learn things from teaching an intern how to do things about the way that you do things. And so I think we're in that same boat with AI. There isn't a definitive set of skills. The technology hasn't stopped developing. We can use today's model as a template for us, but it's really about learning how to use this technology alongside us, and the best ways and the worst ways to use it. I think about students all the time. The example we had about going to the gym and extending your muscle, I think about that in the sense of students. When you have a personal trainer, the personal trainer is the best person to lift the weights, but you never get the trainer to lift the weights. You do it yourself so that you're developing your skills. And it's exactly the same, is work out what you need, what your problems are, and how it's going to help you. And that process of discovery is the learning journey itself.
Thanks so much, Ray. Look, I'll put a link in the chat. The Jobs and Skills Australia currently have a consultation out at the moment. They're doing a capacity study on Gen AI. So we'll put the link in there. But just to close off, Tom, I might call you back, put you in the spotlight there. Any last reflections? Seeing the chat that's happening, it's been tremendous, and listening to those insights from our wonderful panelists. 25 seconds to close off.
I think, Michelle, just a great conversation from the panel, really going to those key themes around trust, the role of leadership. How do we make sure that we are consulting genuinely with our workforce to bring them along on the journey? It just goes to the key theme of the report, which is that there is such an important role in terms of building trust and understanding of this technology if we're going to take advantage of it. And that training, both formal and informal, is going to play such a great role in doing that. So, from my perspective, I learned a lot during that panel, and I think as well the chat going alongside it. So a great presentation that touched on the key themes of the report, and I'd encourage people to have a look in more detail at the report as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Michelle. Couldn't agree with you more there, Tom. Just to wrap up, we do have a very quick poll question, which mirrors the question we asked in the consultation around how interested you are in receiving more AI training. So we'll just bring that up now. And whilst that's happening, I just want to say thank you so much to the panelists for attending today. Thank you, Tom, for taking the time to present. And thank you also to the team behind all of this. It's been a massive effort by a number of staff at the FSO. So, we're really, really grateful for their support and making this run so smoothly. We couldn't do it without you all. We've just put up the link to the full report. There'll be additional resources and op-eds and other opinion pieces coming out over the next few months. But just want to say thank you so much for attending. Really appreciate it and hope you enjoyed today's session. Goodbye.